Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our lovely panelists. I'm really excited for you to hear some of the insights they're going to share about the way they've been building their business and the way they've been using data and creative and the mix between the two to really meet this new consumer. I think we all understand, as the industry has matured and gone through every different cycle under the sun in the last 4 years, how much the consumer has changed and how much more important it is now to have a very specific product focus and a very direct conversation with them. It's no longer about just, there's THC in this product and so therefore I want it, or there's CBD in this product and so that's a thing I've heard of and I'm gonna take it. Consumers are a little more savvy, they have a little more understanding about what they need and what they're looking for. And in an increasingly crowded space, the complexity on the brand side is then how do you stand apart? How do you have a conversation that is specific? How do you bring them products that really meet their needs and that are based in real data and not, I think, the last panel touched on this at the end, not just claims that can't be backed up and that aren't necessarily even what the consumer is looking for. So that's what we're going to talk about today with this crew of absolutely brilliant founders, brand marketers, researchers. And to sort of set the scene, I'm going to have Loree kick things off. Loree is the VP at Attest, which I don't know if we've clarified, but is a consumer insights firm that works with CPG brands, a handful of cannabis brands that are here, and also recently completed a very large study with Prima, specifically about the consumers in the space. So she has a lot of really interesting and compelling insights to share about this consumer that I think will sort of set the scene, and then we'll dive into the details. So Loree, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Verena. And I just want to thank Jed and Jonathan for inviting us to be a part of this amazing event. I've been captivated with every speaker that spoke for the past 2 days. How about you guys? Everyone having a good time? Amazing. Great job, guys. And thank you for telling about Attest. So we are not the typical brand that shows up here or a vendor. We are a consumer research platform that enables brands, retailers, companies to reach their target market, the consumer they want to speak to, continuously. So you can pose questions, like really important questions that are driving your business. And we believe that constant checking in with your consumer is really a strategic advantage. We all know you're not one and done. There's not one answer. And over the past 2 days, I've watched people talk about how gray the space is, right? And you might think you know who your consumer is in California, but that's not your consumer in Massachusetts, or you just don't know what you don't know, and that's kind of where we come in. So we discussed what would really be interesting. So we wanted to do a really broad study, recent study, nationally across just what is the perception of CBD? Have you purchased it? What's driving the purchases? Why aren't you purchasing? And there's a lot of really interesting data points, but I'm just gonna hit you with 3 right now. So top line, what we found, and I think this is amazing, of everyone we surveyed, over 2/3 have bought CBD in the last 12 months. And that's a huge difference than last year, even, certainly a couple years ago. And I think this is kind of funny, but not surprising. I don't know if you'll find it surprising, but of that subset, the 60 that have purchased it, most of them are parents. So as a mom, personally, I don't think that's really surprising. I don't know if you do, but an interesting data point. You've got a lot of parents out there using CBD, right? And then we were really interested with the flip side of that. So if you're not, purchasing, what's stopping you from purchasing? And what we found there, we keep talking about it, is education, education, education. 69% just don't know enough, followed by I'm frightened, right? So they're frightened of it. And I would say 11% were like, I don't want to get high. So they still assume they're going to get high from CBD. So much to do in that space. And then the third thing that we thought was really interesting is, what drives the purchasing behavior, right? What's most important to them? And anytime you're talking about purchasing, someone's going to bring up price. But where we saw the most conversation around price was in gummies and tinctures. right? And that makes perfect sense because that is what most people are buying. But what we did see on the flip side there were other emerging categories where price was no issue. So if you're talking about sexual wellness or pet or beverage, price didn't seem to matter there. But what we really loved about what happened next was what matters after price is trust. So they need trust where they purchase, trust in the retailer, trust in your brand, and then recommended by a friend came up. So recommended by your friend, your family, or your physician. So Jonathan and I were chatting and we were super excited. There's such an opportunity for your referral programs, your ambassador programs. What can you do to really get a trusted advisor to help move the needle with your brand?
Thank you. Super, super helpful. I guess one question I would have, just to follow up on that, you sort of intimated that potentially it's skincare and maybe intimacy, but like where do you see the biggest opportunities then in the space that maybe people aren't thinking about?
Well, I would think we're really excited about beverage, and we talked about that yesterday. I think beverage and food is really a lot of white space there. There was no price sensitivity. It is such an easy, again, I keep talking about Jonathan, but we talk about that transitional drink. I think where that hits the sober curious, I think that's a huge opportunity. And we did see some in pet. There's intrigue, but not a lot of product.
Well, on that note, when it comes to sort of launching products and finding white spaces, James, I think you have a particularly compelling approach to it. I want to get your quote correctly, but my understanding is that you like to create a story and a sort of a marketing angle and a narrative, and then create a product that delivers on the promise of that story. So that you sort of start with marketing and storytelling and creativity first, and then create the product to fill that. Can you tell me a little bit about that process, how it works, and where you've seen success?
Yes. So I'll take a step back and unpack a little bit. I think any new entrepreneur founder, when you start a business, like one of the natural things is just to get obsessive over this keyword data. And data drives all this decision making and so on. And for a while it does. It establishes a good baseline of understanding. But when you've been in the space long enough, you start realizing our view on data has been that it's a snapshot really of yesterday's performance in the market, what the cohorts, what the audiences look like from that day past. And it really then presents another challenge, this urgency as a business on how quickly you can enact what you've learned from that understanding, that data, and then push into a new transition of speed to market. We see too many founders that have created great ideas but spent 2 years, 3 years developing the concept only to see the market pass them by. Like, we all know that story. It's happened 100 times. And so another thing that we do after we've recognized that is that the cannabis industry just doesn't have enough of it, right? The data's not there. We happen to be in CPG long enough to have some intuition that one thing drove our decision making, which was design a story, meaning we don't have the luxury of advertising and marketing, we don't have the traditional means, and so reaching customers in ways that we want to aren't available. That means that the product has to become the story. And if you take the notion that product, like in our case with Vessel, is shareable, it's a social ritual, that you need to put all of that thoughtfulness into the product, bake it into the design, and that's what you're alluding to, is that starting with the value and the promise of what we intend to deliver, and working back to put the pressure on our product design team to deliver those promises through the expression of the product is absolutely key. The last bit, data is important, but then there's another obsession that we've learned over time that we emphasize more, which is this one key element that despite gender, age, race, cohort, whatever you want to call it, that the keyword thoughtfulness is a universal language with all customers. How thoughtful you can be in creating an experience, right? Designing product in a way that maybe the customers didn't expect. You don't always know who you're aiming for, and this is, again, like I said last year, one of those rare instances where this industry has customers that are 21 all the way to 90 years old. So being too narrow and too focused might not always be the play, but the idea of being the most expressive brand that has the most thoughtful delivery of a certain idea, that tends to win every single day. You asked for examples in the Google Doc that you prepped, and so I wanted to, this isn't a product plug, but when we started, we only had $250K in the bank, and we had to design a product and get to market, right? We had 6 humble SKUs that we launched back in 2018. And we did release a product that had a proprietary charging port, and listening to data, customers hated us for it. They literally like, great, here's another startup changing another thing, I have to carry another cable, they're idiots, we hate them, and they hated on us for a good year. But we launched and we won because design was uniquely different. We delivered an experience, better performance, better style, and then as soon as we had funding, we grew. We had an opportunity because we had already thought about where we wanted to end up. It's kind of like where the puck was going. And delivering an experience like this, rather than the USB kind of plug in, lay it on a table or the ground, we had this type of elegant design in mind. And so pushing that forward, once the customers experienced that, and that's where we wanted to end up, there's no going back, right? A customer didn't want to go back to the traditional commodity product. So again, a tip here is that assume any product you have is already commoditized. It keeps you honest that you have to do something above and beyond everybody else. So in our case, we stuck to our guns, designed a product, released it, and oddly enough, this bottom piece, the base charger, is our #1 seller every month. It's not even the base, the vape pen. It showed that customers wanted to put it in every room, much like the white cables for their iPhones. And so now the customers are continuing to beg us to do more and more and more. So
It's so interesting because I think data pre-launch of that wouldn't necessarily indicate that the charging base would be, if you surveyed customers, would it be, what's your #1 purchase?
Right.
It's not going to be the charging base.
Absolutely.
But instead, you went with the intuition and sort of the response and created something that now data proves out to be true, or the data that you didn't have prior now exists. So I think that's really compelling. Speaking also of data, Charlotte, I would love to hear a little bit about your approach. So for those of you who don't know, Rebelle is a dispensary in Massachusetts, but Charlotte is the CEO of a larger vertically integrated cannabis company called Community Growth Partners. Correct? Yeah, I got that right? And the decision, however, was to really launch with a dispensary first as part of your vertical integration. So can you tell me a little bit about why you went retail first versus cultivation or anything else?
Yes.
And how that has driven your brand growth and how you've used that approach moving forward?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll even go back before we launched our dispensary and talk about how I used consumer data to really develop our brand identity and validate sort of our social purpose as a company. I was really fascinated by a lot of the Nielsen research that I was reading in 2018, 2019 around this idea of belief-driven consumers, that consumers are looking to the private sector and companies to have values, and consumers want to be aligned with the values of the companies that they buy from, and are increasingly dissatisfied with the traditional institutions that we use in this country to solve social problems. So this idea of just and equitable capitalism is something that I've really studied my entire life and done a lot of work around. I've built my own social enterprises, working with homeless women, working on the streets of San Francisco, New York, and DC. And so I thought when I got into the cannabis industry, I wanted to have a very strong social purpose and try to articulate that to consumers. And I felt that it was very important because this cannabis plant, as we all know, has been demonized, criminalized, and quite frankly, weaponized to incarcerate people. We have a problem of mass incarceration in this country. And so we, at the core of our business model is to, one of our talent pipelines is people coming out of jail. And they come work in my company and earn equity in our company. And so, I'm proud to say that we've hired lots of people from a nonprofit that we work with. And through these social enterprises that we work with, we're a part of trying to, in our own small way as a small business, solve this social problem. And so for me, I wanted to build a brand and speak to consumers around our social purpose. But quite frankly, as a white woman, I always struggle with that because of the privilege that I have coming to the table on this conversation. And so I'm very sensitive to how we talk about it. And so I started not talking about it. And consumers came to us in the store and said, we've heard about what you're doing, but you don't talk about it enough in the store. You don't display it enough. We want to know more about this, and we want to support products and companies that are doing this. And so we've seen that both in our conversations with consumers in the store and our digital platforms that we've built. So we built, I wanted to start with the consumer and from day one, give them products that they wanted, both that they felt from a values perspective they were aligned with, but for products that they wanted to consume and try and experiment with. So we built, we made a big investment in owning our own data and building our own digital platforms. We own everything, our own e-commerce site. We made a big investment in that because we wanted to mine the data at the consumer front from day one. And we've learned so many interesting things, both anecdotally by speaking to customers and by observing the data that we've seen in the store. And that has really informed the products that we are developing that we'll be launching. And I hope you'll get the chance to come out and take a look at Halo, our first product that we're launching. And so one of the things that we're doing with Halo is something that I call the Halo effect. And that is that not only are we sort of embedding our social purpose in just the way we do business, but we're also raising money by taking a portion of the proceeds of every sale of every unit of Halo, which is going into a fund to help support social equity operators that want to start their own businesses. So in my store, in my small business that we have, I'm so proud to say that in the 18 months that we've been in operation, we have contributed $90,000 to our nonprofit partners, and that, thank you, and that every single person that works in my company, part-time, all the way up to everybody on my team here in this room, earns equity in the company based on the number of hours that they work. So, I'm trying to lift everybody up with me and articulate that to the consumers, and it's been really interesting to see how much they care. And so that's something that's really important to me.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Shawn, I think you had have a very different approach from everyone else on this stage in terms of what you do with Pilgrim Soul. And I think, we've spent a lot of this conversation so far talking about data and how it's informed decisions or how we've taken data to, adjust product market fit. But I think you speak, yes, from data, but really, truly from a creative and storytelling and sort of brand vision perspective. So tell us a little bit about your product offerings, which I think are very different for the cannabis space, and how that informs and has grown your business.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So my brand is Pilgrim Soul, and it's we look at ourselves as a creative performance company where cannabis is one of the products. And we have a suite of other products that we use that enhance everything we do, everything we create is about unlocking the mind and enhancing creative flow. We have a suite of products that are meant to be used while you're high to enhance creativity. To build we have. This is one of our products, so it's Creative Awareness Blend. We have creative awareness, creative focus, creative imagination, creative reflection. And we work with some of the top scientists in the country to build this product. But, you can still smoke our Creative Awareness Blend and think about your ex-husband or your mortgage. There's no guarantee that you're gonna have a creative experience if you're not in the right headspace. So we created these other products to really put guardrails on the experience. And one is this particular book called the Pilgrim Soul Creative Thinking Journal, which it says, please use this journal while you are high. It's super polite. And the cover, this is a wrap, it comes off, because we don't want people to have to broadcast that they get high. And so what that's done, we put this product out first because of data. In part, we wanted to build anybody who buys the journal that you get high and be creative is a potential customer for our cannabis brand. So we put that out in the marketplace to build lists, and we've had over 150,000 customers of this product and about 100,000 opt-in customers around the country, and then we talk to those customers and we find out, what they, who they are, what they stand for, what they want from a product. So it gives us, it's really difficult in the cannabis space when you go through wholesale to own a customer relationship. And so this product it's been really interesting. I mean, I put this out as a lost leader, to enhance the efficacy of the cannabis, and it became, this particular product was one of the top 500 best-selling books on Amazon last year. We've done about $6 million in revenue on just these journals. And I say that because it's pretty awesome that a book about getting high and being creative was like a top-selling book.
So giftable.
It's giftable, and then, yeah, the average person buys about 1.7. And then now we're coming out with adult coloring books. Please color while you are high. But when I was at Lowell, so my background is building consumer-facing internet brands. So it's helped build MySpace from 25 million to 110 million users, and a bunch of blogs like Engadget, Autoblog, a company called Wattpad, and Savage by Fenty, e-commerce brand, and Fabletics. And all of that is, we're really built on data and empathy. The data gives you an idea of where you want to go. You maybe put a product out there, and it's a very ready, fire, aim kind of concept. Then you talk to customers, you see how it works, you readjust, and that's the constant flow of any entrepreneurial company. It should be for any mature company either. But one last thing is that when I was at Lowell, and at Lowell, like Charlotte, like you did, we took out a billboard across from the LA County Jail that said, "Recently pardoned, ? We're hiring." And underneath it said, we're hiring people who were convicted of non-violent cannabis crimes. And we hired a bunch of people from that. But it was also about pushing the industry forward and letting people know what we're trying to do here. But when I was at Lowell, it became apparent that the next wave of cannabis brands were going to be vertically focused, mission-driven, and have a strong belief system. Because there's thousands of products that have the same active ingredient. So how do you differentiate in this market? And that's by standing for something in particular, maybe trying to own a smaller slice of the business, but really being the category king in that small slice. And then, people buy products from companies that believe what they believe. So you have to have a strong belief system. You can use content to garner all the SEO and own the SEO taxonomy around what that thing is that you believe. Create additional products to put them out. And the last thing is when you're building this kind of brand, you need to be able to answer this one question is like, how do we keep score other than money? If you can answer that question, then you kind of know where you're going, you know what your brand stands for.
Verena, can I just chime in on something that Loree, I wanted to comment on something that you said that I struggle with and I think is really interesting, is that pricing. Because to do the stuff that we're doing, it just costs more money. It does. Like, I pay for buses and transportation for the young people from Roca to get to work. Like, just little things like that. So operating a social-focused business is more expensive. And so we have to, capture that in the price. And that is a challenge, being able to articulate that and help people understand, because eventually in our industry, there's going to be price compression, just like there is on the West Coast. We're not experiencing it so much here on the East Coast, but it will happen. And so, I struggle with that. I don't have the answer, but just trying to articulate your purpose and mission maybe could work. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
I think it would. Like, as you were saying that, I was thinking of Everlane, right?
Yeah, do a great job.
Transparency, because if they're really, really on the ride with you, with your mission, and you're clear about why it costs a certain way, I think the right people will part with money. I think where we're seeing price, being a factor is where it's commoditized, right? Like, oh, this gummy or this gummy, versus a strong brand that you want to associate with.
Yeah, I'm curious, and sorry we didn't discuss this, but were there any questions about social mission or equity or giving back in the study that you all did?
That is the exciting thing, or obviously I drink my own Kool-Aid, but with Attest that I think is really important, it's a continual journey, right? So you can keep questioning and you keep asking. So I'm sure if we went back and posed questions like that, excuse me, we'd get feedback on that, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah,
You know,
for
we
next-
still have the
for next year.
the Prima survey and a lot there. But one thing that you just said that I wanted to point out, another data point that was really interesting, is we asked what are the first brand to come to mind. There was no consistent answer. There was no real answer. It was like Delta 8. You know, so there's so much opportunity for brands to own their space, stand for something, and get in the consumer's mind and wallet.
Yeah. One thing I want to come back to, too, that Shawn, you said, and I'd be curious to hear from Charlotte and James, is the idea, you know, you have this data, you have this existing customer, and you can ask them questions, you can get a sense based on their purchasing rate, what is resonating with them, what their feedback is, what's not working. But Shawn, what you mentioned with the notebooks is sort of lead gen, or how do you find the customers that you don't even know you don't have? I'd be curious how either of you have approached that or seen success. And then a follow-up, which you know I can also ask after, but I think people talk so much about this two-way conversation in cannabis and out, right? You know, the whole thing with a beauty brand is being able to say like, oh no, this is what my customers want, and so I'm going to give it to them. Again, that's great, but how do you foster that conversation with people who are not your customers? So one, how are you finding them, and what do you do with them after, and how do you engage that conversation?
I can answer that. I mean, for me, and this is something Penelope and I, you know, talk about a lot with other operators here in the Northeast. Again, you know, we all look at what's going on in California and on the West Coast, and you know, are preparing for that. It will happen here. There will be price compression and increasing competition, and you know, this idea of like you open a cannabis store and they will come and you're going to be rich is, you know, that's just not going to, you know, sustain. It's not a sustainable model. And so for us, like, you can only sell weed and talk weed to the weed consumer for so long. You've got to think about that new consumer. And, you know, the cannabis, there are all kinds of numbers. I see people from New Frontier here, and I don't even want to try to cite the right industry growth data, but I think I look more at the lifestyle market, which is a multi-trillion-dollar market. And so I feel that if we all need to be thinking about wellness, lifestyle, and how we can intersect and talk that language to consumers first. And then, by the way, oh yes, it's weed. You know, that's sort of the way we think about things.
You, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned some differences between the Northeast market and the California market, which I would love to sort of hear a little bit about, because I think there's something very specific there, especially both culturally and just as a more nascent market.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we own our data. And we look across our digital ecosphere on, you know, with all of our Google Analytics, and we marry that with all of our POS data. And so we look at age, gender, you know, urban, you know, people in New York City. You know, we know where they're coming from, both online and in the store. So it's been really interesting to see how different the Northeast consumer is. Definitely a more, you know, newer to it. I mean, there has been a very strong, vibrant legacy market in California that is mainstream. It's more mainstream than it is here, probably. And so we see people wanting other form factors. We sell so many more edibles and tinctures and beverages and all of these new form factors that are more socially acceptable and discreet. One of the things that's really interesting is that we see in our data is that the under, like 21 to 25 and 65 and older are the biggest flower users. But then when you get into like young parents, young professionals, and parents like me, I have teenagers, they want more discrete form factors. And so we need to speak to those consumers, and they have a lot of money, you know? And so we sell, and that it's sort of like there's this reverse bell curve of flower. Like as you get into that 30 to 50 age group, they like beverages, edibles, you know, not things that don't smell, quite frankly. So yeah, that's been an interesting learning experience for us.
James, what are some of the more unexpected customer subsets that you sort of discovered in building Vessel?
So this one's a tough one. I think we're always different because we don't touch the consumable space, so my answers are always going to be a little bit varied. We actually discovered years later, I think I was on stage in November when we had been acquired by Flora, so now my lens has changed. But on the vessel side, it's, we had ignored channels big time. We were small. We knew we wanted to deliver great customer service, so we ignored a big part of the segment, focusing really on direct-to-consumer. But look, when you look at dispensaries and you look at ancillary, there's only about 5, 6, 7, 8 SKUs that are carried within retail. And we're purely an ancillary business. And when you think about what other retail landscapes are out there, it's really driven by head shops and smoke shops. And they weren't necessarily, in our view, the customer that we could support really well. They weren't us. Right? In the beginning, the most authentic expression of brand is your own team. We didn't understand that audience really well in the beginning, so it wasn't to say they weren't important to us, but it was an intentional deferred action for us to then now, we have the resources, we have the channel expansion to now support those channels. And then on the other side, it's pushing initiatives like we've done recently with recycling. We're pushing model bills in with the state of New York now. This isn't about vessel, but this is about sustainability. We're creating another equal and opposite ugly problem in the industry. But to be a small startup, to have the initiative to represent something, as you had alluded to have a mission, values. State of New York, the population density, we don't need to go into it. You guys can put the math together. Not having a voice to express to our state legislation that there's better ways to create a full circular understanding of creating great brands and consumables, but on the flip side, being very caring about our environment and our industry is another way to draw more customers that maybe we didn't know about, people who do care about things beyond just the product experience itself.
Yeah. I have, I think, maybe one more question, but before that, Shawn, I would just love to hear maybe from you, who were the most unexpected consumers that you found via this notebook? Because I do think what your insight is so interesting, the idea that like anyone who buys the notebook, you know, is a prospective customer. But I would also assume that anyone who buys the notebook is maybe a slightly more unexpected customer than the industry might think. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's really broad. We mostly promote it on Facebook and Instagram, so it's about 60% of the buyers are female, but that may also be based on where we promote it. And they range from 18 to 80, and we probably have 50,000 comments that people have left about how this has helped them or changed their life. Or I was kind of shocked that it would do that, but people were saying that I took it seriously, but not as seriously as some of the customers were taking it. And there was people like, people during COVID, people were like, oh, I was in the hospital with my mom, and this got me through, and it kept me focused, or I was in a creative rut, and this really helped me out. And I had people like, but there was a lot of people who are engineers and, scientists and computer programmers and lawyers who were like, I need to think out of the box. I need to, challenge default thinking. I need to get past, judgment and risks and take more risks. And this really helped me do that and think that. And that's really what creative thinking is not for artists and, and for, musicians and poets. It's for a parent trying to educate their child and see the world in a new way, a salesperson trying to close a deal in a new way, or an engineer trying to work some code. I mean, creativity is for everyone. So it was interesting to see that thesis play out and see the different use cases. Also, people were using them on Zoom with their friends. They were like, we do this together. And I didn't see that happening. So Martin Lawrence got this book, the comedian, and approached me to do another one. It's in some of the gift bags, that new one. But in that one, we made more exercises that were, that were meant to be done in concert with other people, really leaning into that. And by the way, we're a cannabis company.
Right.
We're not a journal company.
You think you're...
You think, yeah, who knows?
Can I say one quick thing
Please.
on that? What we found, and it's kind of the edge that we're talking about, is so often people think they know who their consumer is because they're talking to that consumer. And then they'll take a broader study because we can reach everybody. And they uncover someone they really wasn't who they were targeting, right? So they either come out with another product. There was someone over in the UK that, everyone thinks it's millennial or, Gen X, and they found out menopausal women were like really into their product. So they could, pivot, develop another product, spend advertising where it matters, and even across CPG, we see that again and again. Regionally, demographic-wise, you don't know what you don't know.
That's actually a perfect segue. Thank you for that. Because the last question I have, and I would love to make it sort of quick fire style in as much as I want to leave time for Q&A, is when you are when as a brand there's a conflict between data and the brand or creative or marketing or intuition side, which is to say, one example could be you are a brand that said, this is what I want to be. I want to launch the premier THC brand for young female millennials or young male millennials, but the data proved out that apparently your customer is menopausal women. What happens when you see that tension, and how do each of you sort of manage that and say, okay, we're going to follow the data, or we're going to stick to our vision and work harder to find that customer? Or how do you which one wins, and how do you navigate that? Anyone can go first.
Okay, I'll take a stab at one example. So we are really in the business of, we're change agents. Anyone in the cannabis industry is starting a business, but you're also changing people's hearts and minds about something that has been, demonized in our culture. And so we start with education. And so we thought, when we opened our store, we thought, we're going to tell everybody about terpenes and how important they are. And so we had this whole part of the store set up as a terpene experience table. And people just, were not interested. We were way ahead of where they were. And so we had to pivot and re-merchandise that whole area and just sort of like meet people where they're at. And so by asking them and constantly and engaging with the customer and observing them and talking to them, we have the luxury of having that personal, face-to-face customer experience. So we had to adapt. And so the key was you got to meet people where they're at. And so, and that's what we did.
You're up.
Yep. I got a different answer. So there's plenty of opportunity in the marketplace, no doubt, right? We see competitors that are screaming to $100 million in revenue in other categories that we just don't play in. And even with the few brands in the space, natural decision would be, let's get in there, let's disrupt it, let's do our own flavor of it. But we always go back to, because of our team, the discipline, resources, no matter how big, small you are, you have to remain true to whether you can do an excellent job to deliver and support that new endeavor. And if you can't, then sometimes it's having the discipline to say no. We just shouldn't do it right now. And it is the flash in the pan syndrome that, there's so many opportunities, there's underserved communities, and natural inclination is just to get distracted and go for it. What you don't realize is the opportunity cost to go deeper and deeper into where you're already positioned. And so rather than chase and have conflict, it's more conflict internally that, part of our teams will say, let's go for it. And then the other reality is that we have to have the bigger voice to say sometimes we just have to slow down, focus on who we have. We don't want to lose track of the customers that we worked so hard to earn. And so that's really the push-pull for us.
Yeah. What about for you, Shawn?
I mean, we haven't really seen that we're going down the wrong path quite yet. I have, there's this classic Ogilvy and Mather formula that they used for the Dove campaign, where it's sort of like, what is a cultural trend that's happening, and what is the brand's best self? And what does your brand do well? And then the overlap in the two concentric circles is your brand's best self. And for that, it was like their true beauty campaign. So our concentric circles are, what cannabis does. Cannabis lights up the frontal lobe and gets neurons firing in a more uninhibited way, and it represses an area of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the judgment area of the brain. And you fire, your brain fires more ideas when you use cannabis. It doesn't mean, very important thing here, it does not mean that all your ideas will be good ones. Don't email your boss when you're high. But there may be a kernel in there, there may be something in there, you may make some nonlinear connections or have empathy with an audience you're trying to reach, or have some crazy ideas where one of them is good. So we knew that happened, and we also know that there's this trend towards creativity, that in this world of AI and outsourcing, that one of the few things that humans do that better than computers is to create. I mean, it's debatable, but they have these nonlinear connections. They're just crazy. The computers, there's no logic to them. So combining those two things, we put it forward. We're leaning into this trend that creativity is becoming more and more and more important. And we'll see. When I was first pitching this idea, I was pitching to finance people. They're like, I don't know if creativity is that important. It's like, shit. I was like, well, half the songs
Finance people love data.
Yeah, I was like, well, here's some data. Half the songs on Spotify would be gone without cannabis. How about that? But then there's the people who are excellent in almost any profession are creative at it. So the people who invested were really creative finance people.
Thank you. We have just a couple minutes, so I would love to make sure if anyone has a question, we can answer. Oh, okay, we have a lot of questions. We're going to try. Go ahead. We'll move quickly.
Quick question. Well, sorry. Quick question for Loree, but for any of y'all. In your survey collection, do you have any insights, specific insights into what's driving younger consumers in this space?
We do. I don't have it top of mind, so I'm going to grab you after and pull it up, because that's another thing that we saw when we started. Like, we have so many demographics on the platform, we can just, flip back and forth. There were different drivers in each age group, so happy to share it. I will.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie. Loree, I have a question. So data is expensive, right? Charlotte, you said it, you invested in your own, right, so that you can own it. What, if any, suggestions do you have for smaller brands who don't have the money to invest in data? Any creative ways that we can gather this data, because it's so important?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think, personally, I don't think it is that expensive. We can talk to you after. If you look at our starting packages, it really is a drop in the bucket as what you would get as a return on investment, especially in the space. Like, came from ad tech. You can't pull that. You are so data starved that, I don't know if you guys know this, but I was a designer. So I do have a strong brand background, and now I'm on the data side. And it's been so illuminating how empowering it is either to inform your ideas or help you pivot. Like the last question, I'm like, I think it depends on brand maturity, right? Like if you're early and you're trying to find your space, data can make the biggest difference. And then if you're a tad more mature, it could be a new line extension. You don't have to abandon your brand, So, talk to us after.
I think there was one more here and maybe one over there.
Thank you, panel. John Kagir, New Frontier Data. Part of the theme for the conference this year feels like it's about expanding the tent for consumers. So for the brands you're building, I'm curious, what themes or messages have you found to be particularly resonant with the kind of curious, not for the existing consumer, not for the true believers, but for the tire kickers?
Okay, so the most common reasons that people come into our store, I bet you could probably guess. The anxiety, sleep, probably creativity too. And so I think that that's the way that you appeal to the customer, is by talking about the problem they're trying to solve rather than, I'm here to hustle weed, So I think that that's the key, is speaking the language that they're curious about. So that's how we do it.
We speak in terms of like purpose-driven recreational, and especially for an audience like this and educated people. It's like they don't want to be stoners. They want to feel like they're getting a life hack with cannabis. So we speak in terms that way, particularly with our product. But it's really like we lightly position it as a performance-enhancing drug for creativity.
And one other thing, so many people come into the store saying, it's been years and it was terrible, and they're afraid to get high, and we talked about that the other day, and so So I think I would listen to the beverage talk the other day, and I love can. I drink it every night. You know, I am a low dose consumer. I used to be a macro doser back in the day. Don't get me wrong, but like my lifestyle is not conducive of like that. So I'm an all-day low dose, fast-acting consumer, and so I think the more products that feel socially acceptable, that like for me, anything that we develop, I need to be able to do it in front of my kid's yaya from Astoria, my Greek mother-in-law, or my teenage 17-year-old. I need to be able to explain it. So the more form factors there are that feel acceptable, that bring somebody into the market, I think the more we'll evolve.
Last question.
Yeah, so I think that, that dovetails really nicely into the question I have, which is what is the role of retail in sort of the future of the space, do you think? And when I think about it like traditional retail, right? Right now you sort of walk into a store and it's sort of this shock factor if you see anything with a cannabis leaf on it, or like how high HIGH are you today? Like that sort of thing. So curious about sort of retailers that are getting into the space, dipping their toes, and like what's your sort of hypothesis on the future of that?
I can take a stab.
Go for it.
What I would like to see, or what I would think could follow what happened in fashion, is little pop-up shops within, key retailers, so that they can educate and they can promote in the right way, because it's so important, right? The education, the referral aspect. But I know they're so curious. There's a lot of dollars to be had there, and I think that if they can curate spaces within, is what we'll see in retail.
I was going to say, and maybe this will help someone else answer it, one thing I almost mentioned is that retailers are another customer for a lot of brands, right? I mean, James, you sort of said this, that you chose to focus on the D2C customer, but in many ways a store or retail is a brand's customer. So I'm sort of, curious to double down on your question and hear your all thoughts.
I would add, and it might be a direct challenge to retail. The thing that I think consumers are starving for, and brands alike, is a more holistic experience, number one. There's so much, like if the notion every seed that's grown needs to be consumed, and edibles may be one, beverages, there's still flower, there's still vape, and even in the medical realm, flower is being sold or prescribed, but then there isn't necessarily as equal concern around efficacy around what devices they're using to consume such flower or vape. And making that a more complete, cohesive part of the experience. Look, I know dispensers have to move a certain amount of foot traffic through the door, and so there isn't that traditional window shopping and being able to peruse and kind of ask questions either. And so somewhere between assortment, the customer support, and just being able to slow down the pace so people can actually spend time to learn. I know the push-pull exists, but that's where I hope it evolves, is that people can do that. Otherwise, it's the D2C side that we rely on so heavily.
Well, we are beyond overtime. So thank you all so much for being, first of all, thank you to the lovely panelists. Thank you to the audience. I hope it was helpful.